So let's get started this evening in Daniel chapter 2. We're going to move back just a little bit. We're going to try to cover verses 31 through 45 this evening. I hope we'll be successful at that. But in Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 30, it says, "But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory, and wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, as the iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, that they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, for it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure." And so as we begin this evening, I want us to look as we get into this, we're going to start seeing the dream's disclosure. And so after hearing about the king's decree, Daniel is faced with this decision. He is faced with, do I panic? What do I do? And he says, hey, ask the king to give me time, and I'll find out the dream for you. God reveals the dream. Arioch says, look who I found. And Daniel says, it's not me. Again, I backed us up. Important for us to realize that Daniel deflected all praise to God in heaven. Daniel said, it's not because I'm better, it's because there is a God in heaven. And so as we consider all of this, believer, God's way is important. How God speaks to us, talks to us, it doesn't come lightly or easily. We have to spend time working at our relationship with the Lord. And I just want to remind you that we are blessed to be His children. We are blessed to have His love and care and concern, let alone to be used by Him. And so Daniel is making a point here that it's not that I'm so great. It's because my God is great. And he's telling him God is trying to tell you something. And so many commentators have explained that this is essentially God's timeline for the Gentile people of the earth. And we're going to see throughout this progression of the statue. I was talking with my kids this evening, and I was surprised at some of the wrong answers I've got from them. So if you're out there going, I don't understand this, understand I struggled with this in Bible college. And so I'm going to do the best I can to simplify this for you out there in the real world, in cyberspace. But as we consider what this statue means to us, he comes at this telling Nebuchadnezzar, God has a message for you. And he's explaining to you, Nebuchadnezzar, what is going to come after you. And clearly, Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by these things. And so as we see the contents of the dream, imagine hearing that somebody was going to meet the king's judgment, the king's decree. Imagine that these other wise men heard Daniel. They said, oh, Daniel's going to step in and say, how is Daniel going to tell the dream? He doesn't even know the dream is. And how is he going to find out this dream? And oh, by the way, he's going to go tell the king the dream, and then he's going to tell him the interpretation of it. You might say, well, there's some excitement. Hey, maybe we're not going to die. But wouldn't there be some skepticism? And can I give you this? Do you think there was some jealousy? I'm sure there had to be some jealousy come out of these men's hearts because of what happened to Daniel later in his life. We have to consider that not everyone who sees the hand of God bows in repentance and praises the name of God, but God gets glory regardless. Friends, it's utter foolishness to hear of God and to know the word of God, to be raised in the things of God and to reject God. As the old poet said, your arm is too short to box with God. And friends, we just are not able to go hand to hand with God, word to word, face to face. There is no argument we can win with the Lord. It is His way. And so as we look at what is laid out for us, we hear that this image, this statue is great, meaning large. We hear that its brightness, it's gleaming. It looks, fantastic in this dream. And then it says, terrible, mean terrifying. It means that when he saw it, this thing troubled him. It was not sweet dreams, like when you go in and tuck your kids to bed at night and you say sweet dreams, okay? Those were not sweet dreams that Nebuchadnezzar had that evening. And so as we think about this, it was in the shape of a man. And at the top, it was the head of gold and the chest and arms of silver. And any basic Bible student will notice that there was a declining order and value of those things. And God was communicating to Nebuchadnezzar that, hey, from here on out, it's only going to get worse. And so he's the ruler of as good as it's ever going to get. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was Nebuchadnezzar and I had this being explained to me, I wouldn't want to see another statue ever again. I definitely would not do what he did in the next chapter and make a statue that looked like him in order people to bow down to it. That's illogical, okay? But never, we cannot expect an unbeliever to behave in a logical, reasonable, spiritual manner. Okay, friends? And so when people say, well, I'm too much of a logical, reasonable person, I have too much reason to believe in God, and my answer is that's utterly foolish. It's utterly illogical to live a sinful life. And so as we think about this, the head was of pure gold. And if you're wondering how valuable gold is, I did some research on this. We'll see a decreasing value, and not just a small decrease in value. We'll see an utter, amazing decrease in value. And I do want to caution you that there are many different interpretations of this statue. I'm going to give you the most basic, the conservative, the Baptist position, which sees this as kingdoms of mankind. And most of them have already been fulfilled, except for the feet of iron mixed with clay, or especially the toes, as is referenced later on, as we see a reference here to the end times, the second return of Christ, and the millennial reign. And so we must not make the mistake of thinking that every one of these things has fulfilled. And there is a big raging argument out there. Now, if you disagree with me, friends, I'm not willing to go to the cross for it, but you'll find out in eternity that I believe this is the right answer, okay? But as we get into this, the head of gold, the gold is so valuable, it's worth $1,720 per ounce today. So if you were interested in buying actual gold, if you were to get on the gold exchange, you'd find that gold today is trading at $1,720 per ounce. Then silver is trading at $16 per ounce today, over 100 times difference. Now, historically, in ancient times, you would typically buy 1 ounce of gold for 16 ounces of silver. So it was a 1:16 ratio. That was something that held true in a former career I was in, and we talked about that ratio often in some of the logistics work that I did. And we made the comments about bankers would often discuss how that ratio has changed in recent years, and they were wondering what's going to happen, and nothing's happened to this point. But I do want you to see that there's a marked decline from the gold to the silver. And then we see the belly and thighs of brass. Now, if you're wondering, you might have a Bible that translates it as bronze. You might have a Bible that translates it as brass. And you're going, Pastor, which one is it? And so let me give you the straight answer. We're not entirely sure. That's my answer. The Hebrew word that's used here is used 9 times in the Old Testament. I believe 7 of them were in the book of Daniel. And the word means copper or a copper mix. And so it's difficult for us to nail down exactly what this word means. But brass, if you're wondering, is made up of copper and zinc, and bronze is made up of copper and tin. And bronze is older, and bronze is harder and more expensive and more corrosion resistant. The Hebrew word here could be copper or bronze, but I don't think it's worth being dogmatic on this issue. I mean, we just don't know. But if you're wondering about the value of copper, if you will, it is $5,182 per metric ton, or it's 16 cents per ounce. And the legs were of iron. Iron is very common today, and I had a hard time finding out the price of iron. But iron ore, the thing that you would get to make iron out of, sells at $88 per metric ton. And so if you're wondering what that is, it's 0.2 of a penny for 1 ounce. So if you had 1 penny, you would end up with like 5 ounces of ore, iron ore, which is a very common substance. And the feet were a mixture of iron and clay, and there's no mention of toes yet, and that's not even gradable. And one interesting thing I want to draw your attention to, gold and silver today are traded as currency commodities. They're traded as though they are as currency. You can buy them by the ounce, but the rest of them, through time, have become what we consider less valuable. Now, it doesn't mean that in that time period, the copper and various things were more valuable in ancient times at various points in time. But my point here is to explain to you the declining values. There's also imagery involved. There's a descending order, and that order is also not meaningless. If you understand anything about precious metals, gold is the heaviest and most dense. Silver would be the next. And ideally, as a construction, you would put your heaviest, densest, strongest materials at the bottom. And ironically, what is holding this whole statue up is something that is very, very weak. There's a picture for you to see what that statue, an artist's rendering of what that statue might have looked like. And so what we see here is that all of this, all that is holding it up is meaningless. It's a declining value. It's never going to get better. And it also, that what is holding it up has not the strength to hold it up. And one day a stone that's not made with hands, meaning it's eternal, it's supernatural. I believe it's talking about Christ returning in the millennial reign. That's going to come and it's going to hit it at its weakest point. It's going to drop. It's going to shatter. It's going to be driven away. And all that you are pursuing in this life will be meaningless and gone. Friends, we see a lesson here on the important things of life. We have learned a lesson with this virus on how easily and how quickly our world can be turned upside down. There are people just longing to go back to work. There are people worried about illnesses and things we can't even see. And as we consider what this is, life is short. And many things in life are outside of our control. But friends, we have good news. As believers and children of God, nothing is beyond our God's control. Nothing is outside of His abilities. And it's our privilege and joy that we may not be able to control things. We may not be able to find toilet paper. Wasn't it nice to find toilet paper in the store recently? I will be happy if I can find my coffee creamer in the store again. I miss my coffee creamer that I like. But these are the little things of life. There could be far worse. Those are first world problems, friends. Friends, the problems we face, our God is so good and kind to us. We are so blessed to be his children. And as we think about what is being laid out for us, the meaning of this, the eternality of this, I want you to realize that as Daniel lays out the dream to King Nebuchadnezzar, he doesn't stop him. He doesn't say, nope, that's not right. He doesn't say, oh, I remember now. As a matter of fact, later on, he's going to offer up praise to Daniel's God. But I want to tell you something, friends, that Daniel, through God's amazing revelation, was able to deliver an impossible, correct message to the king. And the king knew that Daniel spoke the truth. And he knew that the message that he was about to hear was one of vital importance. And so as we consider what is going on here, the God of heaven is speaking to a Gentile earthly king. And what is being laid out here, as we're about to look into this dream, what is being laid out is a course of events, some of which have not occurred yet. And this dream that the king had, he knew that what he was about to hear was true and directly from the mouth of God. And I marvel at this, because if I was Nebuchadnezzar and I had this experience, I would not do some of the things Nebuchadnezzar did. As a matter of fact, if I was Nebuchadnezzar, I would never want to see a statue ever again. I would probably have them all torn down in my kingdom. But it's amazing to me that Nebuchadnezzar has this experience and has this explanation in detail given to him. And then he gives these orders to Daniel, and then chapter 3 happens, and he makes an image of himself and kills people that don't bow down and worship it. And what kind of foolishness is this? I mean, you talk about having all the answers. And I mean, wouldn't it be nice to know what's coming tomorrow? Wouldn't it be nice to know what the future of your kingdom looked like? I would like to know what stocks to invest in. I mean, people would kill to know, and they spend all kinds of time looking for technical indicators and stuff. But friends, I want to tell you something. Even with all the knowledge in the world, Nebuchadnezzar, instead of turning to God, said, you know what? If it's only going to get worse from here, let's live it up now. What kind of utter foolish response was that? By the way, God's going to deal with that later on in this book. And as we consider what's laid out here, let's look at the details of this vision. Daniel goes into the explanation by showing him respect. Look in verse 37. He says, "Thou, O king, art a king of kings. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory." Daniel's going to address Nebuchadnezzar with respect. He's going to address him from a standpoint of, God has blessed you, and you are the most powerful man on earth at this time. Daniel addresses him with proper decorum and politeness, because what he's delivering is a pretty strong message. He's telling him that from here on out, it's all doomed. From here on out, God is going to utterly destroy everything you're working for. And so Daniel acknowledged him, but he says, your rise and your power is a gift from God. And friends, I want to challenge you that everything we have is a gift from God. Our health, our homes, our jobs, our careers, if you have financial stability, if you have health, if you have family, whatever you love and put the praise in, I got news for you, it's a gift from God. And Daniel makes an utter point of that. He learned what happens when God's blessing is taken away, when he was carried away into captivity. And then as we see this, we see, first of all, there's a succession of kingdoms. Earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but the message is nothing is comparable to God. It's amazing to me as we studied Revelation as a church that mankind in the end times over and over again will seek to try to say we can be happy without God. If you study philosophy, that is truly the thrust of philosophy, the idea of that we can be happy without God. We can be happy without Him. That's modernism. And postmodernism is the antithesis of it. It's the idea, well, we can't be happy at all. No, you can be happy just with God, but we don't want that answer. And as we consider what that means to us, friends, the earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but God is eternal, and God is absolutely sovereign. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows everything, and He's going to give them a history lesson on future events. We see God giving kingdoms to men on earth, but it ends with God setting up His eternal millennial kingdom on earth. And little is said about the second and third kingdom, other than they're inferior, and the materials decrease in worth and weight and structural stability, but we do have interpretations of them, and I'll tell you what they are. The first one is obviously Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. It would be Babylon or the Chaldeans, okay? And so that's the golden head. The second part would be the Medes and the Persians, and so that would be silver, and Daniel actually referenced them in Daniel chapter 8, verse 20, when he speaks of them as one. And people say, well, is it the Medes or the Persians? And the answer is yes. That's actually the two arms. I had a theologian state that one arm represents the Medes and the other represents the Persians, but the reality is that they are one group of people, one ruler, if you will, and that's led by Cyrus, and if you're interested, that's in Daniel 6, verse 28. And the third, the brass or the bronze, the copper substance, was the Greco-Macedonian Empire, which was led by Alexander the Great. And we have that explanation in Daniel 8:21 in a different vision, but it talks about Grecia or Greece by name in Daniel 8:21. And so we see that as Alexander the Great. And then the fourth one, the legs of iron, now that's the one that's described the most with no explanation. Okay, we have almost no explanation in Scripture, but we believe that to be Rome. And that fits because Rome ruled with iron, and they stamped out anyone who didn't agree with them. And I think clearly that's the thrust, because that's when Christ was here. And the two legs represents Rome that was split in two by, I believe it was the Emperor Domitian, who split them, and they became one in the east and one in the west. It was either Domitian or Diocletian, and forgive me, I get some of those names mixed up. But, it was split in two under an emperor who said it was too much. And one of the empires of Rome fell, and the other one stayed ruling for 1,000 years following that. And so if you're a student of history, you can look into that. And then we see kind of a cessation here. And if you look on your statue, you'll see there where it kind of stops. And then the feet of iron and clay. And this is where it gets interesting, because we're not entirely sure. That's where people say, oh, well, that's the fallout. That's the people after Rome. That's all these Western European countries. I will say this. I think the 10 toes perfectly correspond to the vision that Daniel had in Daniel 7:7. And it perfectly corresponds with the 10 horns in Revelation 17, verse 12. And we've already studied that in our church. But remember, there's going to be 10 kingdoms under the Antichrist. And I think this perfectly pictures the timeline of the end times, and Christ is going to come back in the second coming, and it's going to all be shattered to pieces, and all that man has worked for, all that man has lived and built up in their minds is going to come to a crashing end. And you ask, why is the miry clay, the miry iron, why is that interesting? Well, there's a couple of points. Number one, it's going to have some of the remnants of the strength, but not really. The other point is that instead of it being a one-nation rule, it's going to try to be a one-world rule. Everyone's going to try to be incorporated, and that will not work, as is referenced here. That these people are going to try to have this whole, for lack of a better term, ecumenical government, this one-world order, and we see the end times being laid out before us. And friends, there's some of these things that are hard to be understood. Some of these things we're not entirely sure exactly how they will play out. But I want you to come away with tonight with this knowledge, that our God is sovereign, that our God is in control, that the things of this world are not worth living for. And so many of us as believers get fixated on the here and now. My life will be better when I buy a new car. My life will be better when I go back to work. My life will be better when my health is better. My life will be better when I get married. Friends, I got news for you. Only the things of eternity matter. And that is the message that God is conveying then, and that is the message that is yet to come when Christ returns. But until then, friends, we are called to be faithful. And so I encourage you, I exhort you, don't be discouraged. Don't let the things of this life steal your joy. Don't focus on the here and now. Rather, get alone with your Lord in prayer and in study, and focus on the things that matter. Lay not up your treasures on earth where moth and rust and coronavirus do corrupt. Lay up rather your treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through or steal. Friends, it's only logical to put your efforts, treasure, heart, and life into the things that will last forever. And it's utterly foolish to put it into something that will not last here and now. God bless you. I hope this was a help to you.